Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Change Your Mind podcast. I'm your host, Kris Ashley, and I am so excited for my guest today. His name is Mike Nichols. I'm actually going to let him introduce himself because his story is just so fascinating, and I've really been looking forward to this interview for quite some time now. So welcome, Mike. I'm really glad to have you here today.
Kris, thank you very much. I'm happy to be here. Again, I'm Mike Nicholas. I live on the East Coast, pretty far from you, in Northern Virginia. And I wound up here because I was in the military and worked at the Pentagon for quite some time. Just real quick, by way of background, I come from a pretty conservative background. I was the oldest of 7 children, very Catholic family in New Jersey. I had a wonderful childhood, so I have none of those things going on, but wonderful childhood, Catholic grade school, Catholic high school. I went to the U.S. Military Academy at West Point, graduated as an armor officer, and served as an armored cav officer for 8 years in Germany and in Louisiana. And then I served in the reserves for another 12 years. I was in the Pentagon after I got out of the military. So I was in the Pentagon from 2000 to 2015. I was there on 9/11. And I was always just a very pragmatic engineering military guy that thought what we're about to discuss was a bunch of nonsense. I ranked it right up there with fortune cookies and carnival palm readers, with which I have an experience. So anyway, that's what the background I come from. And the reason we're doing this podcast is because my life was completely changed around to now where I accept and embrace the kind of things that I thought were crazy before. And my life has completely changed, basically.
Yeah, thank you so much for explaining all that. I know my listeners were probably like, so why is he here? Hi, I'm Kris. When I was younger, I went through trauma that caused me to feel broken and lost. But my life changed after I had a spiritual awakening. Since then, I've dedicated my life to studying and learning from masters all around the world that have helped me to create a life of fulfillment and abundance beyond my wildest dreams. Now I'm dedicated to sharing everything I've learned so that you don't have to suffer for decades like I did. I've seen people's lives completely transform, and I share it all right here. So the reason that you and I met is you have an amazing podcast. If you want to just talk a little bit about your podcast and what it is you do now, because what I love about you is you have this, as you call, left brain past, and you just come at everything with this genuine curiosity, no judgment. You're open and you're curious. So if you could explain a little bit about your podcast, and then we'll get a little bit more into your spiritual awakening after that.
Sure. I got to the podcast really because I started to write a book, and I'm not an author. I've never written before. I mean, I've kept a journal, I guess, since my kids were little. But in one of the sessions I was having with a medium, which for me was way out there after I had the spiritual issue or spiritual conversion, she told me that I need to write a book. And so I started the book, and then I ran into somebody just online that does podcasting, and they suggested podcasting. So I started podcasting about a year or so ago. This podcast is called The Soul Unleashed, which is also the title of the book. And I've interviewed people that everything from mystics to mediums to psychics to astrologists, things that, again, I would have thought were too far out there to be considered seriously. And now
Right.
I'm open to everything. So past life regression.
Nice. Well, I'm sure everyone is wondering, how did the left brain conservative upbringing, West Point graduate who worked at the Pentagon start to create this adventure and journey and excursion into all of this knowledge? So tell us about your spiritual awakening. How did that happen for you?
Like it happens for a lot of people, it was a traumatic experience for me and my wife. We had 2 boys. One, our younger son, suffered from liver disease, and he suffered for about a year and then passed away in 2020. And it was just as the pandemic was getting started. So if you can remember March of 2020, it was a very challenging time. He was in a hospital and then in a nursing home, and we couldn't see him. The nursing homes were closed down. and then he passed away. I don't think it's probably necessary to go into the circumstances, but he was in a coma for about a day, and we didn't even know that he had been taken back to the hospital because they couldn't tell us. And his name was Matt, and Matt passed away on March 28th of 2020. So it was very difficult for my wife and I. We have another son that has two beautiful grandchildren, not far from us, the love of our lives. But Matt was special, and he we missed him a lot. I guess that's the best way to put it. One day in May, it was May 17th actually of 2020, my wife suggested to me that I go out and hit some golf balls because Matt and I used to do that, just as father and son kind of thing. Went to the driving range, hitting golf balls. I started crying so badly that I couldn't finish hitting the golf balls, and I just walked away and went home. Got back to the house, and project manager type that I am, I had a list of to-do things for that day. One of them was to install some Amazon Blink security cameras, little things about yay big. I had two of them. I put one outside looking at our back door and one on the inside looking at the sliding glass door in our dining room. And we went to bed. And about 20 minutes past midnight, it pinged. My phone pinged. And I didn't even know what it meant, right? I just set things up with the default setting. I had no clue what it meant, but I looked at my phone and it said there's an emotion alarm on your dining room camera. And I thought, holy crap, I just installed this thing and somebody's breaking in our back door. So I jumped up out of bed. This is Virginia, right? So I had my gun and my phone, one in each hand, and I'm going down the stairs, and I looked at my phone and it had a button to push, which to show me what it was the camera had picked up, and I was trying to be sure I knew what I was about to face. Pushed the button and stopped in my tracks. And what it was what I now describe as an orb. So it was a glowing, blinking, round, luminescent thing in the dining room that started where Matt would normally sit when he visited us. And it blinked as it moved towards the camera and then out of camera range. I knew right away instinctively that it was related to Matt and that he was trying to comfort me in some way. I just knew that. I woke my wife up. We couldn't get back to sleep. We kept watching it over and over again. And I didn't know what it was. It happened again about 2 nights later. Same thing, about the same time. And this went on for about 2 weeks. The problem was that my wife and I would be up every night waiting for it to happen, right? We looked forward to it. And so the nights it didn't happen, we'd be up to 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock. So finally one night I said, Matt, buddy, you need to knock this off, or at least do it before we go to bed, would you please? And they completely stopped. Everything stopped. So I was beside myself. I thought, oh my gosh, I've ticked off Matt, I've ticked off God, I've ticked off the universe. I didn't know what to do. And they started again. I figured out another way to see them. And the short story is that I now have thousands of these videos. I can look at them on purpose. I have a number of them on my website. And I'm an engineer, right? So I had to test them and make sure that they weren't dust, insects, spiders, whatever, because I was critical of that. So I tried different cameras. I tried different phones. I wrote to Amazon Blink engineers. They told me the spectrum of IR light that it uses. Well, all kinds of different Amazon Blink cameras. It worked for all of them. And that's what really started my awakening, if you will, to that there's something else going on that I was completely unaware of, that now as an engineer, as a pragmatic type person, this was proof to me that I need to pay attention to something else that was going on. And that's what started this whole business. And I started looking for explanations of this on the internet and with gurus. And I went to the church, the Catholic Church. Can I tell that story real quick?
Yeah, I was gonna. Yeah, please.
So I thought, if God's involved in this, the church must know something about this, right? So I have a friend who I trust, and he's Catholic, and he said, I know this priest at Catholic University in Washington, D.C. I contacted him, sent him the video. This was during the pandemic, right? This was maybe June of 2020. But he met me at the Dominican House of Studies on Catholic University campus. Beautiful, ornate library, He's masked, I'm masked, and I was looking for the key to life. And he says, "Look, I don't know what this is, but here's a copy of the Catholic Catechism." So he hands me this book, which is like this thick, which I memorized a lot of it when I was a kid. But he had no answers, right? So then we went to Georgetown University. We knew a couple of priests at Georgetown, Jesuits, and they were visiting someplace, and we saw them that summer, maybe August. Walked on the boardwalk with them, and I showed them the videos, and I said, "Father, can you tell me what the heck, what is this? How should we react to this?" So they huddled up for a little bit, two of them, and they came back to my wife and I, and they said, we have no clue what this is, but we know this great exorcist that we can have come and clear your house.
Oh, jeez. Wow.
so,
You're like,
so
no,
we
don't get rid of them.
exactly, we were like, no, we look forward to this. This is our son. So anyway, the church, unfortunately, and not surprisingly, had no answers for that. But that's what started the whole thing. So thank you.
Wow. Thank you for sharing. What a story, and what a horrible thing that no one should ever go through. And I appreciate your just openness about it. So you never saw the orb in person, though. It was always on the recording.
It's always well. That's a good question. The orbs were always on my phone, right? So that the Amazon Blink app is on the phone,
Hmm.
and it uses infrared light to see. So everything's in shades of gray. So in my research on the internet, I've run across a number of people that have beautiful websites about orbs, and orbs are real, and beautiful pictures of orbs, sometimes with faces in them, right? Mine are always moving all over the place, blinking, sometimes giving me a high five, sometimes coming right out of my palm. That surprised me, by the way. I, I, I mean, there's no rules, I guess, for how an orb can give you a high five, right? So when I did this, sometimes they hit my hand, but then a couple times they just came right out of my palm, which like it surprised me, surprised me. So they do have a playful sense, but um, I can only see them with the phone. And then I ran into a lady up in Canada that sees them with her phone. She records them, and so I've been recording lately, testing here in the house, and I have seen them without the Amazon Blink camera. I have seen them with just my iPhone, but the light needs to be on. I don't know how the light activates them, but anyway, I can see them occasionally without the Blink cameras.
So your phone would ping, you'd rush down there, it would still be recording, and you'd be holding your hand up, and then later you'd see that it touched you.
Well, no, I guess I wasn't clear enough about that. That's kind of how it could work.
Yeah.
But once I realized it was pinging initially to let me know that it was reacting to light and motion,
Yeah.
then I realized purely by accident after they stopped that one time, you have to turn the cameras on at night, right? Otherwise, if you left the dining room camera on during the day, it would always alert when you walk past it. So I turned them on at night, and I realized by accident if I hit live view, I could see live through the camera, and the orbs were there. So then I thought, what would happen if we walked into the room while the orbs were in there? And we tried that. My wife and I sat at the dining room table, went to live, and sure enough, they were all around us. We have videos of hundreds of orbs around us, sometimes avoiding my head. Um, yeah, so and then to make it more fun, they travel with us. So they're not here. They're not in the house when we're not here. That's a pretty cool uh, rule, if you will. There's certain rules that the orbs follow that I've come to discover as an engineer. I've tested all this. You can look like if you have security cameras in your house, you can look at them through your phone, right, when you're not home, and
Hmm.
you can see your house or your baby or whatever. I was showing some friends the orbs in late 2020, and I said, "Let me show you the camera that usually sees these orbs." And it was nighttime. I put the camera on. There was nothing there, and I was really disappointed. But there was no orbs anywhere in the house. Okay, fine. Then we're in Florida. We spent January of 2021. We spent a couple months in Florida, and we had some people come in and water our plants. And the phone pinged one day. And I looked at it, and I looked at the video, and there were orbs in the kitchen. I thought, doggone it, there goes my whole theory. There's orbs in the house and we're not there. And then the other camera pinged and my neighbors were in the house watering the plants.
Wow.
And my first thought was jealousy. Those are my orbs.
Yeah.
I've come to believe we all have our own spirits, obviously, that are with us or that are around us. These orbs appeared with my neighbors. And it has happened since. There's a couple ladies that come and clean the house. If I leave the camera on, usually by accident, it'll ping. And oddly enough, one of the ladies has orbs around her. The other lady does not. I don't know why. But anyway, they they those are kind of some of the rules. They're never around when there's no people. They travel with us. If I take the little camera with me, even on my motorcycle trips, and set it up, orbs have no ego, right? They show up in Motel 6. They show up at a Marriott resort. They show up whenever I ask for them. They appear. So that's been kind of cool.
All right. So if we all have our own orbs and you have multiple, what do you think they are? Do you think they're your spirit guides? Do you think they're Matt and his friends? What?
I think they're Matt and his friends,
Okay.
but I've become less focused on trying to figure out what they are and more aware that they were designed to wake me up to do what I'm doing.
Hmm.
Right. So initially I was spending a lot of time, what are these? Why are these? Who are these? Now I don't care anymore. I'm focused more on bigger things like the soul picture and the soul journey and reincarnation and manifest all the wonderful things that you and I both believe in, but it was the orbs that woke me up.
I love that. I love that
And
so much.
the orbs have personality too, which is kind of interesting. So sometimes they just glide. They're beautiful and slow and they blink. Sometimes they're pinging all over the place. One thing that happened one time, which again surprised me, we have a camera. It seems odd, I guess, in the house because there's a camera in different bedrooms, but that's where they appear. And the children, when they were like 5 and 7, they saw the camera in the bedroom. And once they realized what it was, they asked me what it was. And I said, oh, it's just a camera. It's a video camera. They wanted to perform for it. So I said, okay, go upstairs. You can perform for the camera. So they went upstairs. And they were bouncing around the bed and making goofy faces and falling on the floor. Came downstairs to watch themselves. And the orbs appeared around them. And the orbs appeared to have the same joyful energy that the children had. They were going in circles and they were flying around and they reflected the energy of the children. And that really surprised me. So I think that there's way more to it than I understand, but I do believe that they are some type of spirit energy related to our loved ones and relatives.
It makes you wonder if children have other children's spirits that come keep them company or play with them or look out for them that have that youthful, joyful energy. I love that. That's really cool.
That could be. I haven't seen it with pets. I
Hmm.
think pets probably have their own orbs. I did babysit my other son's dog over New Year last year, and they were all in their kitchen. I took one of the cameras with me, and the orbs were all there, but I don't know if they were there for me or for Ozzy is his name. I think I don't know whether they were dog orbs or my orbs, but there were a lot of orbs there with us. So
Well, dogs seem to be pretty advanced spiritual beings, so I bet they have some sort of guide with them.
I did test it to where I stayed downstairs and let Ozzy wander around upstairs, and there were a couple orbs with him up there. So I tend to believe the same thing.
So, on your quest for knowledge, since this has all happened, has there been anything that you found that has really struck you that like this feels like the truth? Like you have that soulful feeling about it?
There was an episode with a medium. The first thing we did was we went to mediums, right? Because we wanted to establish contact with our son. And I had no clue what that was going to be like or whether it would work or whether he'd show up and we went to a couple mediums, but one episode in particular that happened, and this was just me. I just did this initially. We did it together, but I did a couple by myself. And first of all, there's no difference in terms of intensity with whether or not the medium's in the room with you, or whether he or she is doing it like like we're doing this, right?
Mm.
So I did a session with a lady in New Jersey like this, and the way mediums work, and you probably know all this, but they have different gifts, right? Clairaudient, clairsentient, clair. This lady could both see and feel, and she started to describe to me. This is going to be a little bit difficult. She started to describe to me. She said, "I'm feeling this feeling on my eyes and my eyebrows and my forehead." And she was just describing it to me, but she didn't know what she was feeling, and I knew right away what she was describing. And that's how I touched my son's face as he died. And when he was a little boy, 4 or 5 years old, I would try and put him to sleep, by rubbing his eyebrows and his eyes and those kind of things. and and so when he was dying, my wife and I had agreed to disconnect his life support system and take him off life support. And he lasted about 15 minutes. But during that period, that's how I touched his face. And when she told me that, I knew exactly what she was describing to me, and it erased any question in my mind about whether or not he was there or whether it was possible to communicate with our deceased loved ones. No one could have known that. And anyway, that was probably the most impactful thing that I experienced.
Wow. You're like making me tear up over here. That's that's really powerful, and what an incredible piece of proof too that he was really there with you.
Yeah, I'll tell
So
you something funny about him if you don't mind, because
yeah,
I don't want to leave you with all the sorrowful part.
yeah.
Matt had a great sense of humor, and with another medium, he's the one that told me to write the book, right? So she's talking to me, and she goes, "He's here. He wants you to write a book, and he wants you to reach people that would not otherwise be reached, who have this mindset of left brain type, um, similar to me." I said, "Okay, great." And she goes, "He's also showing me some past lives that you guys had together." I said, "Cool." He said, she didn't know what she was describing either, but she described Teddy Roosevelt with the turned up hat and the monocle and the Rough Riders. And so I said, "That's Teddy Roosevelt and the Rough Riders." She goes, "Yes." She goes, "You weren't father and son then, but he's showing me that you guys were together with Teddy Roosevelt." I said, "Okay, that's cool." And then she said, "And you also were a soldier with him, with George Washington in the Revolutionary War." And so she described that a little bit. And I thought that was cool. And then she started laughing. And she said, "He's showing me something just to prove to you that souls don't have sex." And she goes, this is like 15th century Spain, and you're a flamingo dancer in a red dress, and he's hot for you." So, so that was the last little life that he shared with me through her. So he does have a sense of humor for sure.
That's awesome. You definitely need to get a QHHT session. We were just talking about that before we
Yeah.
started recording. So do you have any different view of your son's passing now than you did in 2020? Do you, like, with all that you've been through, all that you've seen, all that you've learned, is there any different perspective to it?
Undoubtedly, for sure. I mean, part of what I want to do now is help people that are dealing with the loss of loved ones. The pain never goes away, the missing never goes away, right? But he's told me a number of times that he did what he came here to do. His mission, um, in this life was fulfilled, and it was his time to leave. And it gives me much comfort to know that he's not suffering. Um, he appeared to suffer terribly before he died, but he said something about like that was just the blink of an eye, and now where he is, he's happy. Um, so yes, I'm very much comforted by what I've come to learn and understand in terms of his passing. I'm sure he's with us. He's made comments about things that he's seen happen. One of the mediums we went to initially The lady again describing to us didn't know what she was saying, but she said to my wife, "Can you hear your son?" And she said, "No." And she turned to me and she said, "Can you hear your son?" This was in person. I said, "No." She goes, "He's pointing to his ears for some reason. And he's trying to explain to me something about your ears." And then it dawned on me after she was just about to say, "Forget it," because what they usually do is if you can't confirm it, they go on to something else. Excuse me, I said, "My wife just got hearing aids and you couldn't see them. They were so tiny and she had long hair, right? So they were underneath her ears." And she said, "Oh, he's jumping up and down. That's what he's doing. He's trying to confirm for you that he knows you got hearing aids." And so it confirmed for me that he still participates in our life, that he's still aware of what's going on. And that was also very comforting.
That's really, really awesome. So, do you think that when people die, they go on to live another life, or do you think they hang out and wait for their loved ones to cross over, or what do you think he's doing?
Well, he's told me what he's doing.
Yeah.
Um, I had a session with, it's funny about mediums, and what I've come to learn is that in some ways you get what you pay for. But in other ways, I wanted to taste what caviar was like, right? So I had a session with Rebecca Rosen, who is like the medium to the stars, right? And she is truly a gifted lady. But I couldn't afford, it's like $1,500 for an hour, right? So I couldn't afford that. But she does a session where you do 8 people. And so we're in this session and she hadn't gotten to me yet. She's with one of the other 8 people. And suddenly she stops. She says, "Who's Matt?" And I was afraid to put my hand up because I didn't even know how to act in this kind of group thing. And nobody raised their hand. So she goes, "There's somebody here named Matt." And who's Matt? I said, "I have a son named Matt." She goes, "Well, he's here with this other gentleman's daughter." And she had taken her own life and she was about Matt's age. And so she eventually told us that they were in school together. They were going through a life review together in spirit. And that's it wasn't by accident that this other gentleman, Jim, and I were in the same group because our children were together and going through a life review. So I think Matt's gone through that for sure, the life review part. Um, it used to bother me that maybe he wouldn't be around when I died, right? Because he might have recycled and come back.
Yeah.
But I now believe in the concept of an uber soul, if you will.
Mm,
So so even if that person, that soul, does return to this life or any other dimension, that the uber soul part of that soul is still waiting for me, and I'll reconnect with that, all my loved ones, when I die.
yeah. That's what I believe too. And how beautiful that him and that girl were in school together, and you and Jim were right there in the room.
Can I
Nothing
tell you a quick
happens there.
story about that
Please.
too? If you have time, I'm sorry.
Oh my gosh, I could talk to you all day. Keep going, please.
So so I tried to develop a practice where I would meditate and connect with Matt, right? I read a number of different books where a gentleman journals and writes down things. Um, one of the first books I read was My Search for Christopher on the Other Side. I can't remember the author's name, but he journals early in the morning with his son, and so I started doing that. So this other gentleman in the class named Jim was terribly, terribly still suffering with the loss of his daughter, the one that was my son. And so after it was over, I contacted Rebecca Rosen's secretary and I said, I know you probably can't share with me his address, but can you just let him know that I'm willing to talk to him and share with him what I've learned? Because I was about 6 months ahead of him in terms of the passing. And she said, "Oh, here's his email. You can have it." So I said, "Great." So I sent Jim a long email and I sent him 2 or 3 videos of the orbs so he would understand why I had changed. Anyway, he didn't respond to me. Nothing happened. So about 2 weeks passed. I thought that was odd, and I contacted the secretary again. I said, "Can you just confirm Jim's email?" She did. She said, "Yes, it's him, whatever." So the next day I was talking to Matt, and sometimes, I don't know if you do this, but I struggle sometimes with what I hear, whether it's really coming from someplace else or in my head. But I heard Matt say pretty clearly to me, "Don't worry, he has not yet seen your email." And so I wrote that down.
Wow.
And so the next day, I got an email from Jim and said, "Hey, man, I'm really sorry, but went to spam. And I just found your email." And so we connected and we shared after that. But that was an example for me that I am actually able to communicate as poorly as I do it with my son.
Absolutely. Yeah, and to the point where you can even hear him. Have you come across the book The Afterlife of Billy Fingers yet?
I've heard of it, but I have not read it.
You might want to check it out. I think you'd like it. It's one of the most beautiful books I've ever read. It's about a woman who also was not open to any of this kind of stuff, and her kind of bad boy brother died, but he starts communicating with her in the afterlife, and as he's going through everything, he's describing it all to her, and the book is just her notes written down, but it's really, really beautiful. And a lot of what you said kind of coincides with that as well.
I'll check
So
that.
yeah, check it out. I think you'll like it. So did your wife also have this same kind of spiritual awakening? It sounds like she went to all the mediums with you. Like,
She's
is
no,
she on the same?
no, she's not. She's not into it like I am for sure. My wife actually suffered an accident last August 3rd of 2022. So she's been in the hospital. She still is since then. And there have been a number of similarities and things that have happened. A lot of my podcasts are about what's been going on with her. Um, I thought she was going to not make it. Basically, she fell backwards and hit her head, um, and was in a coma for 2 months. And we had and the parallels are pretty amazing. When she went to the hospital, they took her to the emergency room. She was 2 doors down from where our son died in the same ICU, and she didn't know, but I did. And then after she was put in a tracheostomy and a feeding tube, and uh, she was in a coma, and they can't keep people like that in an ICU forever. So after a month, we had to move her to a special hospital in Washington D.C., where she still is, and they got her off the trach and everything, but she can't really move. But um, I thought we had agreed to terminally wean her. I knew she didn't want to live that way. You know, when our son was in that condition and we decided to turn off his life support, we were holding each other's hand and crying basically. But we said to each other, if I'm ever in this condition, I don't want to live this way. So I knew what she wanted. So I agreed to, my son and I agreed to disconnect her. And 2 days before that was supposed to happen, I walked in the room and she was looking at me, and she said she couldn't talk, and she didn't know who I was for about 3 weeks, but she was still in the vent, the trach, and everything. But she's off of that now, and mentally she's pretty good, but she just can't. She can't do anything. But that's so her spirit journey, if you will, to get back to what you asked me. She's not really on any spiritual journey at the moment. She's just trying to get better. Um, so when I said I was seeing mediums by myself, that's why, because she was in the hospital, and I continued to see mediums because I was continuing this journey. But that's what happened.
It's a lot of trauma for one person to go through in a very short period of time, Mike. Really sorry to hear about your wife. And just for listeners, you said this happened August 2022. It's September 2023 right now. So it's been over a year.
Yes.
So she woke up from a 2-month coma 2 days before you were going to take her off life support.
Yeah.
And she didn't know who you were for 3 weeks, but now she's mentally I mean, that's pretty rare and pretty amazing that she's mentally with it. So what is it that's keeping her in the hospital, that she's unable to like move, or is she
Her
paralyzed?
body is no, her body's atrophied to the point where she has to go through physical therapy to learn how to walk again and learn how to move again. And being in the hospital like that, she constantly has infections. So then she's being treated for that. Then she regresses. Um, that's what she's going through. So, uh, she's well enough mentally to joke with me, and you know, so that's all good. I go see her every day. She's about she's about an hour and a half from me, but I go see her every day, and she's getting a little bit better every day.
Wow.
Speaking of trauma, though, Chris, really, the whole spiritual journey that I've been on has really helped with all this, right?
That was my next question. Yeah.
It has, because both of us have come to better understand and accept what happened with our son. So, today something came up, and she was thinking of him. His picture's right on the wall by her bed. She was crying a little bit about that. But generally, we've accepted that has happened, and what has happened, and that he's fine and happy where he is. And I've come to accept that whatever's going on with her is part of, uh, nothing happens by accident.
Right.
And so whatever the universe is doing right now. But I'll tell you one thing: I manifest, or try to manifest, like crazy. So there's a number of stories I tell in my different podcasts, simple, silly things like manifesting a parking spot at the hospital, right? When I first started listening to Mike Dooley and Esther Hicks and Sarah Bernhardt, is that her name? Anyway, all this manifesting stuff, I read The Secret. I said, I'll start with a parking spot. And it was hard to find a parking spot near the door of the hospital where she was initially. But every day that I would think about it before I got there, I was getting a stupid parking spot. The one day that it didn't happen, I was driving there and I got to the parking lot and there was no parking spots. And I thought, oh, well, this manifesting stuff is maybe for the birds. But it was pouring rain, right? I pulled into the parking garage and there's 3 spots near the door that are never available. And one was there in the covered part of the parking lot available. So it was,
There you go.
it was in the covered part of the garage. So anyway, little things like that. I try to manifest. I needed to see her doctors would show up. I needed to see her nurse would show up. So every day I start my day with a mantra, and the mantra is, no matter where I'm going, no matter what I'm doing, my dominant intention today is to see what I want to see. And I try and set my intention for the day. Have you heard of segment intending?
Mm-mm.
So Esther Hicks talks a lot about segment intending. So I intend for this particular segment of my day, maybe driving to the hospital. I want it to be a safe drive because it's on the Beltway in DC. And so I want it to be a safe drive. I want to arrive at the hospital safely. Or the segment of the hospital, I want to see her doctor. One day I got on the elevator. He got on the elevator with me. I can never find the guy. I got the elevator. He gets on the elevator with me as we're going up to the floor. So I use segment intending every day. I use that mantra every day. So I forget how I got in that topic, but
No, that's such a powerful way to start the day, by just imagining how you want your day to go, right? Because your mind, if you can train your mind to play it ahead of time and really see it and visualize it and feel it, then it's going to happen. So has your wife tried any of the visualization or the meditation and trying to imagine herself healing and healthy, and have you
no,
done any of that with her?
no, no, uh, she's not ready for that yet.
Not ready for
So
that.
no,
Because I think about Joe Dispenza. With what got him started was he had like a crazy spinal injury, and he healed himself. So you never know what the
you
power.
know,
Yeah.
I've come to believe that your calling on spirit does not have to be like you and I see it. Like for my wife, she's very religious, right? She's also from a very strong Catholic family. She was a religious studies major, and she went to Catholic college, and so she prays a lot, and that's her connection to spirit. So it's different from mine, but it's still a connection to spirit. So I think that can be just as effective.
Yeah.
That's what she does.
Absolutely. Yeah, I love that. And I think you're right. I think we all call it different things. Some people call it prayer, some people call it manifesting, some people call it, quantum physics, but it's all getting in touch with that higher realm and that higher version of you.
Have you ever given any thought to why prayer works sometimes and other times it doesn't? Like, we prayed for our son and it didn't work. whatever work means, I guess. I prayed for my wife, and it did work. So I'd love to figure out how prayer works sometime.
I think that we're not necessarily able to consciously create for other people. I think that we are powerful creators in and of ourselves, and that only we can truly heal ourselves. Only we can truly call things into our life. Because I've had a couple losses in the last couple of years as well. Like my dad just passed. I don't remember if we talked about that on your podcast or on mine,
Mhm.
because we just did a double recording. But um, I had the same thought too, that I was journaling and I was doing all the things that I normally do that create magic in my life and have for decades, and nothing worked. But it was his own attitude, it was his own personality, and it was his soul plan, right?
Right.
I believe that we create these big life moments, how we're going to be born, how we're going to die, and some big life circumstances along the way. So I think a lot of that is pre-decided already, you know?
And I believe all that too, and it leads me back to why pray in the first place. If that's the
Because
way
I
it's
think because I think that there's big life circumstances that are predetermined, but I think free will still exists. I think that there's certain things we have to go through in order to that will give us the opportunity to learn and grow, depending on what trajectory we take, what path we take, right? Those might change. But I think that we also get to create our own reality, right? It's both happening simultaneously. And I don't know. I think the power of prayer is just as powerful as the power of law of attraction. I think it's one and the same, really, right?
there's a little story, if you can bear with me for just a second. Have you ever heard of Viktor Frankl and Man's Search for Meaning? That book?
Mm-mm.
So Viktor Frankl wrote this book, Man's Search for Meaning. He was a survivor of a concentration camp in World War II, and it's a short book. First half of it is his concentration camp experience, and the second half is his experience as a psychiatrist in Vienna. He was a psychiatrist when he was put in the concentration camp, but later he was teaching. He survived the camp, obviously. But he has a bunch of students, and he takes them into a laboratory in Vienna, and they're all looking at this ape. And this is in the 1950s, and the polio was just being cured at that time. And the way they were doing it in this lab, where they were constantly injecting this poor ape with needles to test different serums and different things, and the ape was suffering terribly. And Frankl said to his students, he said, "Do you think it's possible that this ape understands the bigger picture, why he has to suffer for this cure for polio?" And all the students agreed there's no way that ape could possibly comprehend what was going on or what his role was in the bigger picture. And Frankl said that, so what makes you think that what your understanding is in this life provides you with an understanding of why you suffer here?
Hmm.
And it really struck me because, the suffering that I went through with our son, for example, I didn't understand why that was necessary. But I do believe now that there's a bigger picture that I just don't appreciate. I can't appreciate, but that it exists.
I love that. That's really profound. I think about it, I think about all of these lifetimes strung together, right? Where each one is just like a split second. It's like a blink of an eye, right? Kind of like your son said. And it's like our story doesn't start and end when we die in each lifetime. Our story started the moment we were created. And it ends the moment, I don't know, we go back to source, I don't know. But it almost feels like each lifetime is a chapter, right? And that's why I love QHHT so much, is because oftentimes things that are afflicting people in this lifetime, whether it's a disease or a phobia or a relationship issue or something, can be explained by what happened in a past life. So it's almost like our story is so much bigger than even just this lifetime that we see. And sometimes we have rest lives where those people, you look at them and you're like, they have a charmed life. They've never gone through anything difficult. Things come easy to them. It's like they were born with a silver spoon. But you don't know what kind of lifetime they lived before this, and before that, before that. Like maybe they needed that rest. So I think the story just extends so far that how could we even possibly know? But I don't know. It makes me just like reframe the suffering we're going through. And I don't know if what I'm getting across is what I'm trying to get across, but
I
I
think I
just think there's
understand,
such a bigger, grander scheme to it all.
Chris. I understand completely. Well, I understand what you're trying to say because I struggle with this a lot. I read another book recently. It was about, I don't know if you ever heard of this, but there was a bunch of Polish officers murdered in the Katyn forest during World War II, and by the Russians, and their families were rounded up by the Russian, it was called the NKVD then, and sent to Siberia. Hundreds of thousands of little kids and women perished in Siberia, and the stories of what they went through, they were just dropped off and left to die in the snow. And I wonder, why would God permit children like that, 2 years old, 4 years old, to just suffer and die? That scenario only makes sense when you frame it the way you just did, that this life is just one of the many lives that we live, and those souls have a reason and a purpose to suffer like that, but they'll have other opportunities, other lives.
So Dolores Cannon, and I know you're into Dolores too, talks about how we come here because we want to experience everything. And that we're not a whole complete soul, we're actually a fraction of a soul. And quantum physics backs this up too. So every time you have a choice to make, for example, your timeline branches and you go on to live out the choice you made, and there's another version of you that goes off on another timeline living that other choice. And then each time each of you have to make a choice, the timelines branch again. So there are just infinite number of timelines, plays starring you as the lead actor. And quantum physics backs this up with the many worlds theory, right? It says that, and the many worlds interpretation says that, because the whole thing is like particles are waves, but they appear, or electrons are waves, but they appear as particles, matter. So every other possible place that that particle can appear exists in another parallel reality in the same time and space as ours, right? Just laid on top. It's like a transparency, a different dimension laid on top of ours. And Dolores's whole idea is that we want to experience everything. So there are timelines of you who are very similar to the life you're living right now. And then there's ones that are vastly, vastly different. And maybe there's a timeline where you died as an infant. Maybe there's a timeline where you live to be 100 years old. Maybe there's a timeline where you're still with the first girl that you ever kissed. Maybe there's a timeline where Matt's still here. I don't know. But we want to experience all these things. We're here to have experiences. And then the idea that Dolores talks about is once we cross over, once all of these different versions of us cross over, it's kind of reconvened, and we get to bring even more knowledge back to source, and we get to have even more experience to draw from in this school. So I don't know. I think about that a lot too, that, there's,
So different
maybe,
parts of
yeah,
us. So different parts of us are on all those different timelines.
yeah. And then it gets even trippier because the whole idea is that past lives are actually parallel lives, right? Because time itself is an illusion,
I,
right?
yes.
And it's part of this 3D construct that we've created, this illusion of reality that we've created. But there's really no time on the other side of the veil. And you were talking about an oversoul. I call it the higher self. It's the same thing, but there's always that part of you that's on the other side of the veil. That bigger part of you, and that's the part that's connected to source, and that's the part that's always there. I don't know. It's mind-blowing to think about it all. I love thinking about it all, but to me, it helps me, or it has helped me. I don't know. I don't know if like rationalize is the right word, but just kind of cope with the traumas that I've gone through, or the difficulties that I've gone through, or the losses that I've gone through. Just
What's the name for that concept of all the multiple choices being available or existing? Is there a name for that concept?
Well, in quantum physics, it's the many worlds interpretation, but the more spiritual aspect that Dolores talks about, I don't know if there is a name for it necessarily. Someone probably created a name.
The reason I'm asking is
We'll have
I
to
interviewed
Google
a
it.
young lady a couple weeks ago, and she said that exact same thing.
Really?
She's only in her 20s, whatever, but she was conveying the same thing to me, that we constantly make decisions and branch,
Hmm.
and that all these lives are being lived simultaneously based upon what choices we make. She didn't have a name for it either, but I'm just wondering what it's called. Sorry.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. Dolores writes about it. I think she wrote about it in Between Death and Life. I think. I don't know. I've read a lot of her work, but I don't know. It makes me feel like my problems aren't that big of a deal, or the suffering that I'm going through is for a reason, and it's not that big of a deal. I don't know. It somehow puts things into perspective. It makes me feel like this lifetime is small, and we don't need to take it so seriously. And that is, I mean, that is so much easier said than done, but it has done that for me. That perspective shift has made it okay that certain things have happened or certain things haven't happened.
Have you interviewed any near-death experience people?
I haven't.
Reason I ask is
I haven't,
because
but
I interviewed a lady named Grace Ghanem who had an NDE,
uh-huh.
and what you just said triggered my memory of that. She said exactly that. That is, while she was going through that experience, and she did the whole tunnel thing, but it was all with colors. She's an artist, and so she saw colors and sounds that she had never experienced before. But she said specifically that it became clear to her that this life was meaningless in terms of the big picture. Whatever she was going through, whatever she was experiencing, whatever challenges she had, meant nothing. And so, yes, I believe you're onto something when you say that.
Yeah. I've gone down the rabbit hole reading about near death experiences and watching testimonials of them on YouTube, and it's so fascinating because all these different people from all different beliefs and backgrounds and walks of life report such similar things when they're on the other side. It's not only they leave their body and they have this heightened awareness and they can hear and see things in other places, and then they go through a tunnel and they go through the life review, and what the one of the best parts of all of them is that they are not judged for a single thing that they did during this life. It
Yeah,
is just pure unconditional love. Even the worst people who have committed the worst offenses aren't judged because it was all a learning experience, and you are just loved unconditionally.
where do
Like
you
a
think
father unconditionally loves their child. Yeah.
where do you think the justice comes into play on that? I
Hmm.
meant to ask you this when we were talking on my podcast, but what do you tell a parent, for example, whose child's murdered, say, by some terrible act in this life, and you tell them that the person that committed that act is not going to be judged when they die, not going to be punished when they die? How does someone accept that?
I think that's really tricky because I think that you are talking to, and I don't mean this in any kind of negative or bad way. I think you are talking very much to that person's ego. And by ego, I mean earth guide only, right? You're talking to someone that has gone through something horrific, that is here very much living in the reality of 3D earth, right? In those kind of circumstances, people aren't ready to hear about the bigger picture. But there was a part in Between Death and Life by Dolores Cannon where she talks about Hitler. Do you remember that part? I know you said you read that
I
book.
do. I do. Yep.
Where she was saying that he was totally forgiven and that it was all because of his father, and he had to go to a resting place for a long time to just
Right.
heal. And his father was the one that really needed to I don't know, go through some extra schooling on the other side. So, okay, so Alan Cohen is one of my favorite authors. I don't know if you've ever read any of his stuff. He wrote A Course in Miracles Made Easy. He broke down A Course in Miracles. Have you read A Course in Miracles?
No, but I still have notes from when we talked weeks ago where I have it
Yeah.
written here, A Course in Miracles.
Yeah, you'd love it because it's channeled from Jesus directly, and people call it the Third Testament. So there's Course in Miracles study groups, just like there's Bible study groups. And he goes through the New Testament and he's like, this is how this was misunderstood. This is what really I wanted you to take from the resurrection. This is, and it's really fascinating because, the Bible was written by men, sometimes a long time after Jesus actually died. And it's interesting to hear it, from Jesus himself, if we believe that that's the case. But Alan Cohen wrote A Course in Miracles Made Easy, and it's like a really great intro to it. If you're curious, or anyone listening is curious, it's phenomenal. But he has this story in there where he was at this seminar by this woman, and she was talking about forgiveness and how important it is. And this Jewish woman in the audience stood up and was like, I don't buy this forgiveness bullshit. How am I supposed to forgive someone like Hitler? And the woman up front was like, well, let me ask you a question. Imagine that you live next door to Hitler when he was a little boy, 4 or 5-year-old boy. And you saw him every day, and you saw his alcoholic father, and you saw his mentally ill mother, and you saw the abuse and the neglect. And let's say that if you showed that little boy love, it like makes me tear up. If you showed that little boy love and just treated him well with kindness and just acted as this loving person in his life, that you could change the trajectory of his future. Would you love that little boy? And she grew, I'm like such a sap. I'm like tearing up. She grew really quiet and she was like, yes, I would. And then Alan was saying that after the whole conference, this old woman walked up to the speaker and she said, everything you said was absolutely true. And she gave her a hug. And when she gave her a hug, he saw her sleeve come up and she had a Holocaust tattoo on her. And, I think that there is such power in forgiveness. And I actually have an entire chapter on this in my book about, it's called What About People Who Do Bad Things? How do we cope with the rapists and the murderers and all those people? And those people are coming from a place of deep pain and deep fear, and they have a hole in their soul. They have never known love. They have no self-confidence. They are tormented. And by showing them love and kindness and compassion, we could not only possibly help them heal, but maybe they have great gifts to bring to humanity. So, I don't think that someone whose child was murdered by someone is ready to hear all that, but that's kind of my bigger take on it.
I think it impacts society too, because if I was a father who had a child who was harmed or murdered by someone, one of the reasons I don't immediately try and take things into my own hand is because I believe that he's going to face justice with God or Jesus or be in hell forever. If I thought for a minute that there was no justice, at least according to the pain that I was feeling, I would be more inclined to try and serve justice in this lifetime. So I think there's a real problem with that. I struggle with that. That's why I asked you. I believe, like you said, that I don't believe there's a hell, but I do believe there's some type of life review or school or something that you go through to recover from whatever it is you did bad in this lifetime.
Yeah, and I've heard from reading and watching near-death experiencers that oftentimes part of that life review is feeling how you made all those other people feel.
Yeah, I've heard that too.
But I understand what you're saying, and I think the very human part of us is like, but there has to be justice, right? Something has to be done. But why? Why can't there just be this world where we are just here to have experiences and knowing that we make mistakes and that we learn from everything we go through, and if we mess up, we repeat the lesson and we do it again until we get it right, until we learn to treat people with kindness, until we learn compassion, until we learn those things, and then we move on. But at the end, you're just met with unconditional love because it's all a learning. Right. And it makes you take everything a little less seriously, or maybe you have to take it a little less seriously in order to wrap your head around it. I don't know. I don't know. And I'm not saying like one way is right or one way is wrong. It's just, it's interesting
You
to
must
ponder.
you must live in California. No, I understand what you're saying. It's just hard, and I've never been in that position, so I don't know how I would react.
Yeah. There's another story on forgiveness that I write about in my book. This woman named Corey Ten Boom. Have you ever heard of her?
No.
She was a Christian actually, but so her family got locked up in a Nazi concentration camp. I don't know why this keeps going back to the Nazis, but they got locked up in a Nazi concentration camp during World War II because they were hiding Jews in their home and helping them escape. They were Christian.
Mhm.
And her father and her sister died in the camps. And when she got out, when the war ended, she set up recovery centers for survivors. And one day she was in town and she saw this Nazi guard. And it wasn't just any Nazi guard, it was one who had been particularly very cruel to her sister. And she confronted the man and he asked for her forgiveness and she gave it. And she felt such a release from that forgiveness that she then spent the rest of her life traveling the world and teaching about the power of forgiveness. And her whole thing is forgiveness sets you free. I don't know. It's like if there's people like that that can forgive and then go on to teach it because it was so profound for them.
Yeah.
Like I can forgive a few jerks in my life, but I've also, never gone through the
Have you been
experience of
able to
having a
forgive?
child. What's that?
Have you been able to forgive what happened to you?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it took a long time. And I think a lot of this, it's like, it's easier said than done, right? It's for people who are in the storm, it's not easy. And I had to forgive a group of people. I was actually a target of cancel culture in 2020. A whole community that I was a part of started spreading lies about me on social media. And it was honestly very traumatic. And it took me a long time to forgive them as well, but I have. But it's easy to slip into anger, you know?
Yes.
This was a heavy conversation, but I think it was such an important one, and I really appreciate you sharing your story and your perspective. Is there any message that you'd like to leave humanity with? Anyone listening to this?
Main thing is that there's something else beyond what we can see with our five senses and sense with our five senses. It's real. It exists. I always struggle with that, even though I grew up Catholic and prayed to God. And for me, it took the orb experience to fully embrace that. And then what I found through, psychics and mediums and being able to contact other people on the other side. So the main message that I would want to get through people's heads, especially those that don't embrace any of this stuff, is there definitely is something else beyond this life.
Yeah. Thank you so much. So, how can people get in touch with you? Where can they find you? What are your
Pretty simple.
offerings?
Thank you. Thank you very much. It's just MikeNicholas.com. That's my website. And my book will be out by October. The Soul Unleashed is basically kind of a biography explaining how I became such a knucklehead early on and how that changed. So just MikeNicholas.com. I'm on other places, but all those links are on my website.
And The Soul Unleashed is your podcast. Uh,
Yes.
Everyone go listen to Mike's podcast. It's amazing. He has so many incredible people on. And again, what I just appreciate about you is you're just curious and you're so open-minded. And because we don't really know the answers. We know what we learn that feels right to us, but there's so much that we don't know. And I just appreciate your inquisitiveness and your quest for knowledge.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. I really enjoyed meeting you too, and talking with you. So, and you'll be one of the really interesting people on my podcast too.
Yeah, it was on Mike's today. All right. So, everyone, thank you so much for tuning in today. Go check out my book as well, Change Your Mind to Change Your Reality. It's an audiobook, paperback, ebook. Follow me, Change Your Mind with Kris, and we'll see you next time. Have a great rest of your day, everyone.